It's so easy to dream of the days gone by. It's so hard to think of the times to come, and the grace to accept every moment as a gift is a gift that is given to some. What can you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams find your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away. There are sorrows enough for the whole world's end. There are no guarantees but the grave, and the lives that we've lived and the times we have spent are a treasure too precious to save. What can you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams find your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away. What can you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams find your work to your play. What can you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Dara. I'm John Hansen's nephew, and it was fun before this started. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of John's family and friends, and I'd like to thank Steve and Dave Ellman for providing us the space. We were looking all around Door County for a space that would be reminiscent of John's cabin, and we found it here. So we do need to be out of here by 2 to let them set up for their evening concert. So there's some coffee downstairs, and then we'd like to invite anybody who wants to go back to John's cabin, which is 2668 Double E, Bailey's Harbor, and we'll have some sandwiches, and we can gather, and anybody who needs to say something that they didn't get to say can do it then. For most of you, I mean, this was just a shock. I didn't know what to make of it, and then I'm still trying to avoid processing it. And one of the things that makes it hard is that John lived in many worlds. He'd be in Colorado, he'd be here. We experienced him on such an intermittent sort of thing. It's like he's not really gone, he's just there. But John was a teacher. We knew him as a teacher, a craftsman, an artist. He was activist, a comedian, an adventurer, and a friend. He had always a ton of energy and enthusiasm, and that usually didn't last to the end of the project. But it was there. And then he had enthusiasm for the next project. And we're here because John changed our lives, and he showed us that you can choose your own path. That he did his own thing. He was self-directed, and you can make your own destiny. And he showed us it wasn't easy, but you didn't have to get permission from somebody else to do what you needed. And John took many of us on our first adventures. For me, I was just a kid in high school. He had just moved to Colorado, and I went on a bus in spring break to go visit him in El Dorado Springs. First of many adventures with John, and John also, he loved to tell a good story, and a good story was one where John was the main character. You could find humor in almost everything. One of our last conversations, he said, "Well, now I don't have to worry about saving for retirement." He had a core belief that it was a major character flaw to take yourself too seriously, and it was his mission in life to make sure that nobody suffered from that character flaw too much. He sort of used humor as a defense and humor as a weapon. John grew up in the 60s, and that informed him. He grew up at a time where the hypocrisy of the system was really exposed, and he saw the national character as being flawed, and he took it on himself as a mission to be an activist and to be politically involved and always fight the fight. So some people know him as a teacher or a ceramics artist, don't necessarily know that he was always politically involved. He started his involvement in theater in high school in a variety show. Is that right, Fred? Were you with him in the variety show at East High?
Yes.
Yeah. So he did a lot of the comic relief, and so that was, John's always been involved in theater sort of since then, but being an actor was a lot of, you're taking somebody else's lines, that wasn't him, and doing a lot of practicing, and that wasn't him. So his role, sort of, the one he most often did in theater was the house manager, where he could be the show before the show, and that's, he loved doing that, and his sort of spontaneity and maybe some of the theater professionals who took themselves a little too seriously weren't necessarily always happy with John's show before the show. So anyway, interestingly, a couple of years ago, he was at an AFT presentation or performance, and Tony Shalhoub was in the audience, and Tony had gone to East High, a couple years younger than John, and Tony came up to John and said, "Hey, I wanted you to know, I started in the theater because I saw how much fun you and your friends were having." So, in the theme of John really influencing other people, if you like Monk, you can thank him for that. I don't know. So John's life work was ceramics, a medium that he expressed himself in. During the Vietnam War, he was in college, and in those days you had to protect your deferment. A gap year could end you up in a rice paddy getting shot at. So he was looking for an extra class to fill up his full-time class requirement, and he was like, oh, ceramics, that'll be an easy A, right? I don't have to write any papers. So for those of you who know him as a ceramic artist, you can thank Richard Nixon. Kind of weird, right? But John, of course, wasn't interested in being a production potter because that's, a lot of the same stuff. So he pivoted into teaching pottery because, he could reach out and still be the show, while he's teaching. So that was, one of the other parts of his ceramic career is that he was able to come back and work with the Cohens, Abe and Jacob Cohen, and really extend the life of the Potter's Wheel for at least 5 more years. And one of the compounding tragedies of John's death is that he was sort of carrying on the legacy of Abe Cohen, and so that's another tough one. And just I've gone on too long, but John's cabin was a sort of a rustic Northwoods salon, and it was a great place for me as like this kid to go up there, and people were living there, and they were writing songs and discussing ideas and writing stories and coming up with ideas for shows, and it was a great place to be. So John was, I was thinking of, he's like a Pied Piper, but he didn't really ask people to dance to his tune. He showed everybody you could compose your own. So anyway, Jackie, or Snooky Bradison, this is John's sister. Come on up. She's our next speaker. So.
John would have liked me to do a little poem about him. I don't know if it's a poem or a limerick, but this is for John. John Hugo Hansen. From the time you were that little boy, you were naughty and nice, but always a joy. That Sunday in church, you made us all nervous. With your shiny toy gun, you disrupted the service. And he did. Those teenage years were filled with excitement. Travel, family, and friends, always a delightment. To his companions, Steve Lambert and Doc Heidi, he was loyal. They traveled the world and left their mark on their soil. During college, to gain knowledge, Mother's basement was where friends did stay. Mother nurtured that strange plant each and every day. John's exploits, with stories he did embellish, but we all asked for more with such relish. Between Wisconsin and Colorado, John divided his stay. He usually arrived sometime in May. Mudslingers, AFT, Peninsula, school, Door Shakespeare were his passion. He did it all with ultimate fashion. John's cottage with bonfires was a haven to all. Great stories and ideas from it grew tall. Helping Abe with his studio was his mission, to keep the studio open with little commission. Eric, we think of you with all our heart. Let us all stay together. Keep John in our heart. It is difficult because we are apart. Let us all stay together, keep John in our minds. Family and friends are the ties that bind. Memories, we have John. Thank you for all. These are your words, both big and small. Smart, creative, amusing, clever, generous, loyal. Yes, John, you had it all. Love forever, Snooky.
And so Christopher Dara, my brother, another of John's in that case.
Talked about John's free spirit and independence and going out, and that was a big influence on me when I was a kid. Actually, this is an appropriate venue for John. One of the first business ventures I remember John having was buying and selling barnwood. He had his old flatbed truck, and he would go out to where they were tearing down a barn and load it up and buy it for a little bit of money and then go try to sell it for a little bit of money. I don't know if he made much money doing that or not, but it didn't last long. But he had this old flatbed truck. Anyway, and some of my early memories of him were, like John and Fred. They would show up at our house after hitchhiking all around the country. They'd be filthy, dirty from the road, and they'd have all these amazing stories, and like John going to Europe and then coming back, and like we're these kids, these little kids living in this kind of a dead suburban town that nothing really happened there, and then like that was just like a very exciting thing to let you know there was a real world out there, and that's part of what John did. And like Bill, some of my early adventures were with John, like getting into his VW bus that had to be push started and driving like out to Colorado or around Wisconsin, and it was always a big adventure with John. So he did have a big influence on me too. That's, yeah, good.
Somewhere, yeah. But you couldn't see me, I was in front. Right in front, So I'm Tim McNerlin. I met John, like Devin Corinne, in 1984. But my real experience with John came when I decided to stay for the winter in Door County. And I met John at a craft fair in Sister Bay, and he said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, I just got a job at the bank in Bailey's Harbor, and all I need to find now is a place to live." And John goes, he goes, "I've always wondered if anybody could survive the winter in my cottage. How would you like to try?" And I said, "Sure, what could possibly go wrong?" So I did it for 2 winters, and I'm a survivor. I consider John a spiritual person, and for that reason I chose a song here I'd like to play in his memory. Now I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair, she broke your throne, she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah. 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 I did my best, wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, I didn't come to fool you. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Thank you, Tim. Steve Lambert, John's old-time friend from junior high, on.
Yes. As he said, met John in junior high school, and we were friends for a couple of years, and I was as shocked as ever anybody by how swiftly he passed. And we were in the process of going down to see him, and found out he died. So I never got to talk to him. And I felt compelled to write a letter to him to say things I didn't say. Dear John, you've been a great effect in my life. For that, I'll be forever truly thankful. I've always loved our interests together. You brought me out of a shell and made me try new things and expand my horizons. What will my world be without you? I'm sorry. I miss my adventures. I remiss the adventures we'll never have. The conversations we can never share. What will I do? We have shared so much of our lives, even though we lived thousands of miles apart. How will I learn the next best truth? Who will talk about politics or religion but the person who shared his ideas with me, and then they became mine? When something interesting happens, I think, what would John think about this? I already missed all the ideas, new and old, that we can never discuss. I will miss your love of life, your posing as a native and always getting away with it, your wonderful altruism when you gave Herculean effort to preserve Abe Cohen's legacy. You're always testing and butting your head against hierarchy and organizations and then create your own, in your own image with mudslingers. I will miss your great love for your son, who is ever in the forefront of your thoughts and your concerns for his future. And thank you for letting me into your wonderful family, your mom, your sisters, Katie and Bill, and this great family which have become my own. I will miss hearing of all your adventures and secretly wishing they were mine. I will miss your eloquence and clever turn of phrase, a talent I always wish I had. What will I do without you? You're always a big part of my life, drifting into it in summer and out again in winter. In my 20s, I had been set free, and the thing I wanted most of you was like you, all of it, the drugs, fun. The iconoclasm, the irreverence, the love of ideas, and the clever conversations. I was never so alive as when I was discussing ideas with you and Bill. What will I do now? I keep thinking of all of our adventures together, being high school friends, college roommates, hiking Isle Royale, climbing Mont Blanc, on Lumps Peak, working on the cottage, the road trips to Colorado, camping on Maui, all our sailing trips, or just walking down Cattle Lane, just being best friends. I can't tell you how incredibly sad I am. I can't imagine life without you in it. You only get one lifelong best friend. Thank you.
Fred, this is Fred Heidi, another very, very old friend of John's from high school. Somebody who lived in John's mom's basement. And survived. I've been wondering for a very long time what to say at this event. And it's been very hard to figure that out for several reasons. And the first is I feel like I ought to be spontaneous because, as we all know, John was the soul of spontaneity, and somehow it'd be violating something if I prepared my remarks too much. So that's one reason. Another reason is, some of us remarked, John left us so quickly that many of us are still in shock at his loss. And John was such a fundamental force that it almost doesn't seem possible that he could not be in the world anymore. It's like I woke up in the morning and suddenly all the songbirds had vanished or something. Something really important that held the world together was no longer there. And so I'm still, part of my mind just can't really understand or accept it yet. The last reason is that, as Bill alluded to, I'm one of many here who knew John for such a long time that I have way too much to say about John in a short period of time, and a lot of it is not socially appropriate. We met in 1966, some of you know this story. My family had moved from Wisconsin Rapids to Green Bay, and we got put together in what I think they would now call an AP biology class. And we had to pass a test to get into it, and Mrs. Humphreys, who ran that class, arranged the whole thing alphabetically, and because his last name was Hansen and my last name was Heidi, we became lab partners in 9th grade. And among other things, had to dissect a fetal pig together, which is a bonding experience if there was one. My nostrils have still never quite recovered from that. And then we went on to have this whole series of profound adventures, among the most powerful, really, of my life, without exaggeration. Many of the things that have most shaped me and affected me and were things that happened with John. Well, for example, we'd start taking ski trips together up to the Porkies, because he was the only one in our class who owned a car. And the senior year of high school, he proposed that we take a ski trip to Aspen, Colorado. And of course, we were really terrible skiers, but that sounded really exciting. And so we rode the Amtrak out and then Continental Trailways. And like every trip that involved John, something went awry. Continental Trailways shipped all of our gear to Texas. And so we had to figure that out. And another story happened on that trip that I'll share really briefly. It's one of the stories that John loved to tell that did not involve him as a main character. We were staying at the Denver YMCA the last night because it was cheap. I was taking a shower, of course stark naked. A guy came into the shower and came up to me as I was taking my shower and asked me if I would like some relief. I was a really naive kid from Green Bay. I wasn't even sure what he was talking about. And I was flustered and I responded, no thanks, I'm with a group. John just thought that was absolutely hilarious. We retell that story constantly. And then we ended up being college roommates, as was alluded to. In fact, quite truly, I would not be here today. I would not be in Door County. I would never have met my wife, all these things,
if it hadn't been for John, because John had stayed at UWGB, UW Green Bay, after we graduated high school, and I had gone off to Madison with a couple other friends. And John gave such a glowing description of UW Green Bay, and Madison was just big and impersonal. So I decided to transfer back there, which is how I got involved with the Heritage Ensemble and all these great friends who are here today. And without that, I probably would never even heard of the Heritage Ensemble. So John actually is, surprisingly to many people, responsible for the entire birth of Northern Sky Theater. Without him, I don't really think that would have ever happened. So he invited me back and said, well, you can live with me in, your mother's house. We're at Wally's house, and so I thought, okay, that sounds good. So I moved in with John, and it was like a month later that John then moved out and abandoned me to live with his parents, which was a bunch of stories in its own right. And then we went on, and of course the greatest adventure we had was quite early on, after the first year of college. John proposed that we take a hitchhiking trip together across the country, which in retrospect seems completely insane. It was an era in which hitchhiking was much more acceptable. And my parents had moved to Rylander by that point, and my mother took us out to the highway and dropped us off on Highway 8. And we proceeded to hitchhike together 8,000 miles. We went up to the Trans-Canada Highway, all the way across to the farthest west of the continent on Wreck Bay and Vancouver Island, then all the way down to Los Angeles, where we stayed with John's Aunt Frida, and then back up to San Francisco and all the way back across on 80 when we showed up and told great stories to Bill and Chris and so on, Katie. So there are way too many stories to tell from that trip. To just briefly mention a couple of things, we hopped freights for the only time in my life. We slept for a week under a giant fallen log on the Pacific shore where it rained the entire time. We ended up riding, literally sitting on the legs of a corpse coming back from Vancouver Island, because that was the only way we could get off it, because there were so many hitchhikers, and this guy gave us an offer: you can ride in the back, and you have to sit on this corpse. So we did. And on and on and on. So that all happened, and then, again, off into the future. So there were all those adventures. I just wanted to briefly mention a couple things people have alluded to. I think we probably are all aware. John was a loving and supportive father to Eric. John was a charismatic and inspirational teacher of pottery, as well as being a really creative potter in his own right. He inspired any number of people, hundreds of people, I would believe, to actually try to find themselves through pottery, because John was really interested in pottery as a way of locating your own sense of self and finding that artistic side and freeing it. So it was almost pottery as therapy, really. It was kind of how he foresaw it, and I think a lot of people responded to it that way. John was also an extraordinarily generous person with his time and effort, and there's hundreds of stories, I'm sure you all have them about that. One that comes to mind is our daughter was getting married last summer, and my wife's parents got lost on the way to the wedding venue, and they showed up right before the ceremony started, and John leapt to his feet and ran over and helped them get seated before the ceremony started. John was constantly doing things like that. He was always looking out for other people and making sure that they were comfortable, and this is one of the reasons he was such a great host at Dover Shakespeare and American Folklore Theater, Heritage Ensemble, and so on, because he really had the soul of a host and was very, very welcoming in all things. I guess I also wanted to mention, as I reflected on John, although we were such close friends, it's a little bit surprising to me that we became such close friends, because there were a lot of ways in which we were really different from each other. And two fundamental ways that we were different was, I'm very introverted. It may not be apparent to people, but I really like spending time alone and in quiet and so on. John was the soul of extroversion. He was always happiest when there were people around. And John was a very hard worker, as many of you know. He would spend many hours out there at all hours of the day and night doing his pottery, usually listening to a Brewers game or something like that. But if he could entice someone to come over, that was even better. And then you could sit for hours and have deep conversations about the meaning of life. So he was really extroverted. And the other thing that he was really different from me when I met him was I was extremely cautious back then. I was very planful. I had to eat dinner at 5:30 at night. I mean, I was just very, very organized in my life. And John was not that way at all. John was like, again, making it up as he went along. So over the years, John pulled me, I think probably more in his direction than I managed to pull him in mine. And I got looser and looser, and I think that was one of his great gifts. One of the things I think about when I think about John is he felt to me like he had some of the archetype. I hope this isn't too intellectual for you at a memorial service, but he had he embodied some of the archetype of the trickster deities that many of us are familiar with in Native American mythology, for example. Among the Southwest Native peoples, this is referred to as coyote, or here in the Ojibwe call it Winnebago or whatever. The trickster is this archetype in which the trickster is a very giving personage, and he will supply the people with corn or teach them how to use fire. So on the one hand, he's extremely beneficent, as John was, but the other thing that the trickster does is, in many of the stories, the trickster notices where there's a boundary and goes beyond the boundary as a way of teaching the people what happens when you transcend a boundary. And again, there's hundreds of stories like that with John, and just to mention a couple, in the 80s we took a trip down to Mexico together, and I think if I were to poll the assembled multitude here and ask you, what is the one thing you do not want to do when you go to Mexico? It's drink the tap water, right? The very first night we were there, John drank the tap water and became horribly ill. I mean, so ill that he was hallucinating. He didn't know who I was, and was raving, and obviously, all the symptoms of that. But then within a couple days, John had recovered enough, even though he was still quite ill, that we could get on a bus and go to Barra de Navidad further to the south, because he had such metal in him. And John was just such a strong personality that he wouldn't ever be put down by whatever ailment came his way, and he had a series of them in his life. He always managed to figure out how to survive them. Another example of this was a trip I wasn't with him on, but he'd love to tell this story. He was down in Mexico one time, and he wanted to go scuba diving, and he noticed that the gear that he had rented didn't have an air gauge on it, on the oxygen tank. And when he asked the guy how he would know that he's running out of air, the guy who rented it to him replied, "Oh, you will know, senor, you will know." And John being John, he went scuba diving anyway without an air gauge. I mean, he would just, go a little beyond. And I think, as I think about all the many things that we've lost, I mean, for me personally, that's one of the things that's been so important to me, because John taught me I could be looser than I thought I would be. He taught me that I didn't have to be as planful as I might be. He was always somehow making it work, even though we weren't following the rules, as you were talking about earlier, Bill. He was a rebel, and he inspired me in that direction as well. And there's this odd way in which John was both exposed me, or let me put it differently. I was thinking about this. There's only been a handful of times in my life in which I've been in mortal danger, almost died. John was with me on virtually all those occasions. I counted up Friday night at least 5 times in which I almost died when John was with me, and some of them he almost died too. I mean, it was just like, what is that? We were always kind of the edge of things. Not that he necessarily caused it, but somehow we had put ourselves into a position through John's bright idea that, this danger habit, flaming car wrecks, or almost getting stabbed together on the Trans-Canada Highway, or drowning in the overflowing Pacific Stream, and so on. There were a lot of those instances. So in a way, there was always that edginess about John, while at the same time, my mother, who was a very moral and religious woman, always thought John thought of John as my protector, which was absolutely true. When she dropped us off for that 8,000-mile trip, with virtually nothing, we had like one shirt extra, tiny little backpack, a really crappy little army surplus sleeping bag. The fact that we were going to the West Coast didn't concern her because I was with John. She somehow thought it would be okay because I was with John. And then my wife Jody told me that on her deathbed, John came to visit her, and my mother asked John to look after me and be my guardian after she had gone on. So we hope he's still doing that up there in the beyond, where we will all catch up with him eventually. We're going to do a song to celebrate John. John and I shared many musical interests, many of the same bands we loved, and one of the bands we most admired was the Moody Blues. I think John had all the Moody Blues albums, and John was not a religious person, but as Tim said, I would regard John as a spiritual person. He was on a quest his entire life to figure out the meaning of life, and the Moody Blues, exemplified that in their lyrics. So this song reminds me of John from an album that we played endlessly. We were in college together.
Doc had the idea, some of you know that Northern Sky is building a brand new home. We'll always be in the park in the summer, but we're building a home to ensure our future, which is the epitome of taking ourselves a little bit too seriously, I think. But we are building a new home. We're very close to finishing the building and the campaign, and a couple of people have been contributing to name a seat in John's honor. So I know he had many wonderful causes in the area, the Peninsula Art School, Doris Shakespeare, Northern Sky, AFT. If that's something that you want to contribute to, I'll put it into that fund and we'll name a seat after him. And in the interest of being a little bit spontaneous, our new building is just a stone's throw from here. And if you're hanging about afterward and before you transition to your new space, if someone would like to go on a tour, just find me in my Heritage Ensemble t-shirt.
In a photo that John took, by the way.
Yes, proving I've been around for a long time as a fan. I'd be happy to take you on a quick tour, 30 minutes or so. I can get us in there. So just find me around, and if anyone's interested, I'm happy to do that real quickly between your things. If not, that's okay too, but I'm available if you'd like to do that. Oh, yes.
Yeah, let's control this. One, two, three, go. Well, I've got dreams enough for one, and I've got love enough for three. I've got my hopes to comfort me. I've got my new horizons out to see. But I'm never gonna lose your precious gift. It will always be that way. 'Cause I know I'm gonna find my own peace of mind someday. Someway. Where is this place that we have found? Nobody knows where we are bound. I need to laugh, I need to sing, 'cause I've had tears too many for me. not enough for three. I've got my hopes to comfort me. I've got my new horizons out to see. But I'm never gonna lose your precious gift. It will always be that way. 'Cause I know I'm gonna find my own peace of mind someday. Some way.
Bill? And there's another Bill there in the room who would have thought that. John's great nephew. Bill.
You like to meet Mark?
That's right. He had a better mustache than me, and my just unfortunately. So, yeah. How is this? This is good.
Good.
So it's weird to call him John Hansen. He was always Uncle John, and he certainly had the energy of an uncle. He was, as everyone said, very giving, very familial, very like supernatural. Has a negative quality. You could say larger than life. He was always. I grew up in the suburbs, and as my uncle Chris said, the suburbs are boring. Sorry, they're not terribly exciting, and every once in a while, an uncle from faraway magical Door County / Colorado would come down, we'd chat, we'd hear the most amazing stories, the most amazing adventures, and it was such a portal to what could be. He was like a working artist that was so cool to a kid in grade school who was interested in the arts. He was in theater, like he was in these amazing circles. We had, what, Doc Heidi and the Pills, was that the, yeah. Like, I had that CD growing up, and it was like, it just, in the suburbs, that wasn't in my world. And so through John, I would see this amazingly rich, flavorful, colorful universe. And that was always Uncle John's, territory, his thing. And he was just this magical adventurer to me and all my brothers, I think I'm speaking for right now. And as a kid, I would come up to the cabin with my dad, obviously, and brothers, and sometimes mom. And you've been there, I hope. We've all seen it. It's, again, colorful. It's a memorable place. And I distinctly remember even the smallest things, like instant coffee and sausage for breakfast, had this just otherworldly quality to it, because you knew it would escalate and, avalanche into something greater and greater, until by the end of the evening, we've talked to 14, monks who are traveling across the continent, and, all these weird stories would come up, and it would always begin with these, tiny little things that were familiar, but John would just have this magic aura about him. He would attract the right things, the most interesting things, the most memorable things. Just this magical presence. I always, he had this kind of kaleidoscope of cool people, of amazing arts, of amazing stories. It's just larger than life. I've never met anyone close to that.
And I saw the movie Big Fish. If you have all seen this, please do, it's very good. My father told me, oh, this is Wally Hansen. I said, no, this is John Hansen. He said, no, this is Wally Hansen. And so, I don't know Wally Hansen, I never met him. You all know John Hansen more than I do, probably. But he was a big fish, and he was a very magical person, and I think we can all identify with being part of his family, which I think is a mark of a really special person. So.
Suzanne Graff and Jerry Gomez. John was at Door Shakespeare for a long time. These are the founders of Door Shakespeare and friends of John. Just a quick aside, it was great going up there and getting, John would always stick me in the seat that he knew would be the audience member pulled out to get abused by the cast, and that was a load of fun. Anyway.
You were good at that.
Fun.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Is that?
You good? For me, it needs to be there. Well, I met John back in 1991 when after meeting Fred Heidi at a little audition in New York City, I went to this place called American Folklore Theater in this dream place called Door County. And I think there were 7 people on the payroll that year. Talk about growth over 30 years. And John was one of them, of course. And he kind of completed the family, the familiar circle. You had those of us who were on stage and trying to make and create something wonderful for an audience to enjoy, and those who were Dave, 2 people technically trying to run the show, and then there was John, who was hustling the posters and the flyers, and also then greeting the audience, and yeah, he completed the circle there for me, and the bonfires at his house. People have talked about that. One of my greatest memories of a bonfire at his house was, and it's appropriate that it was at John's, is that everybody was taking turns singing a song, probably not me though, but then somebody said, no, let's sing something we can all sing together, let's do a sing-along. So we did 100 little sing-along songs. It was great. It was great. Years later, after working at AFT for a time, and AFT having given birth to Door Shakespeare, Jerry and I, who had a history in Shakespeare, wanted to bring that Door Shakespeare project back to life. And luckily, we were extremely lucky that John was available to get on board with us. And because again, it sort of completed the family circle. I mean, Stuart, you were there, and I know I just saw you. Yeah, Stuart, it became a nice close family, and somebody, I'm sorry, I'm so emotional, but somebody was just talking about the family and adventures, also adventures, and how John created adventures. Well, Door Shakespeare was our adventure, and John made it possible.
Well, I think too that John also brought a why not quality that transferred over into the work that we would do, and transferred over into the idea of, well, why can't we do that? So we would try these things that we never really thought of, and then unfortunately for John, sometimes we incorporated him into it. There would be times that we would have like a pre-show, that we would have somehow do sort of a dumb story to sort of tell the story before it actually happens. And there were times that we would incorporate John, and he would reluctantly do it, but he also looked like he was having fun, and I do believe that he enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, we actually gave him a part when we did Cyrano, And he came in, he had to wear a little half costume and had lines and had to come in with the professional actors. And oh, he was so nervous about it. He was so good. He was so good. But the joy he brought, I mean, I think my parents came to Doris Shakespeare as often as they did to see John. Because he was so entertaining and there was nothing to bring him down. I mean, he always went with, if some little small thing went wrong, he found a way. Oh, we're out of ones. Who's got change for a 20? You know, get people in the line moving around, or if there's a little rain delay, or you never worried about it when John was in charge because he was always entertaining people and making sure people were serviced. And yeah, he was very special that way. The two sides of the coin for me with John is the, you know, he was a great talker. And there was always long conversations on the phone with him as well as at Bjorklund. But he was also a really good listener too. And nothing made me happier than when I was off stage at Doris Shakespeare and I could see John standing back, usually with a pipe or something, you know. Watching and nodding his head. Just amazing, amazing. Drinking it all in. And for all of that he put out and that he gave and the energy that he brought, to see him sit back and just take it all in, that completed the circle for me. That it was really, so we miss him dearly, as we all do. And I am a spiritual person too, and I believe in a God that forgives us and will bring us all together in the end. And I know that John is in good hands. There was that wonderful passage in, was it Northern Lights, about the souls of those who have come before us will lead us and welcome us. And I can't help but think that John's going to be right there in the front. Come on in. So I pray for that day. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here, and we'll conclude with a song. And oh yes, did you want to?
Yeah.
No.
Oh. I think everybody who, yeah, come on up and.
I just wanted to quickly mention this fellow here who's grabbing the guitar and is going to be doing the lead on the song is Craig Kowalski, who is a foundational member of the Heritage Ensemble. So we really appreciate Craig's help today. We also wanted to thank Bill Dara and your family and Eric and all the folks who worked to bring this together today. It's really been wonderful and incredible. Thank you so much.
I want to say one last thing too, because I'm kind of like John. I got to get the last word in. We've heard great stories about John. I think what will bring this all together, especially for the young people in the room, is don't leave here without sharing those gifts with other people. That's our task today, in memory of John, to move that along.
There's a ship out on the ocean at the mercy of the sea. It's been tossed about, lost and broken, wandering aimlessly. And God, somehow you know that ship is me. But there's a lighthouse in the harbor, shining faithfully, pouring its light out across the water for the sinking soul to see. can redo if our heart's in the right place. On a prayer, in a song, I hear your voice, and it keeps me hanging on. Whoa, raining down against the wind. I'm reaching out till we reach the circle's end. When you come back to me again and again, I see my yesterdays in front of me, unfolding like a mystery, revealing all that is and is to be. On a prayer, in a song, I hear your voice, and it keeps me hanging on. Whoa, raining down against the wind. I'm reaching out till we reach the circle's end. When you come back to me again, you come back to me again.
Somebody was gonna, oh, Holly, where did she go? You were gonna.
She's in pink.
Right.
Yes.
You were gonna maybe take people who wanted to go to
If
the.
anyone wants to, meet me downstairs. We'll do a quick tour. Northern Sky has their volunteer picnic today, so I'm gonna try to get over there after. Right, Cheryl's not here.
Is that Deb and Corinne?
Yes.
Yeah.
I really debated what to wear today. I'm so glad I wore them.
So did we.
That's fabulous.
Thank you all. We'll also be later on going over to John's place on Double D here. So just go down F until you get to Double D.